Thank you. Thank you. Bruce has come up with some three challenging questions already, so I save it for later. And since we are already 5 minutes into the meeting, so without further ado, if I may start the presentation. So welcome to the club. This is an extended session of our Tempus Infinitum Club, and I welcome the members to be. If you want to join us, you can do it at any time. And my presentation is linked to the book that's published quite recently ago, Prevail or Fail, a civilizational shift to the world of transhumans. But today, the focus is on how we can prepare for AGI arrival by 2030. My agenda covers 4 points. First of all, I start with the definition, what we are talking about. What is artificial general intelligence? And if I may, just right now, I would like to thank David for organizing a unique survey on AGI, which I would encourage you to join, and I send later on a link to that survey. But anyway, in that survey, David spends quite a lot of time on the definition, and each of the 3 parts of artificial general intelligence is defined separately. So this is a serious subject. So I spent only a minute on that, and then I move on to not just AI regulation, but to a neglected subject of AI development control. And then I just list what I metaphorically call 10 commandments to control AGI effectively. And finally, I move to the most controversial part of my presentation, which is how may transhumans save us from a hostile AGI? From information technology to superintelligence. For me, the broad definition of artificial intelligence is that it simulates human intelligence in a machine. Information technology, about which we all know and we love, this is just data processors, memory, sensors, communication, Starlink, undersea cables, and so on. But the most important thing about information technology in the context of artificial intelligence is that we should remember that when, in general terms, if you have a certain input, you always get the same output. So it's not probabilistic, it's a binary kind of state. So this is a kind of a body of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence itself that we have now is called artificial narrow intelligence. So these are sensors and neurons which enable machine learning to make intelligent, probabilistic decisions. And currently it surpasses human intelligence in just a single area. But soon we'll have artificial general intelligence, which is a self-learning general intelligence that will be smarter than any of us in any situation. It can be a single humanoid and can be connected in the network. So what differs artificial general intelligence most from artificial narrow intelligence is that it is supposed to have a cognition. So it recognizes what it is, who we are, and what its environment. Now, this is a big debate now going on by when we will have artificial general intelligence. I put it forward as by 2030. I'll discuss this in the next slide very briefly. So that will be followed by the further self-improvement of artificial general intelligence until it reaches superintelligence, the self-organizing intelligence, probably conscious. I'm in the camp of those that think it is conscious, but there are a number of scientists that think it may not be conscious and doesn't have to be conscious. I disagree for the following reason, that I do not believe that in the context of the universe, that superintelligence has to be embodied in a biological organism, that it can be non-biological. And that's why I think it may be conscious. So that superintelligence will be kind of a mind, and we're talking about information technology, which is a body, and altogether it will be superintelligence. When it will be available, my best gut feeling is around 2050. But I only briefly go back to the question by when we will have artificial intelligence. My general definition is that it is a self-learning, superior to humans intelligence, capable of solving any task far better than any human. And if you go to that survey that David has set up, you'll see slightly different definitions of AGI. But for the purpose of our today's presentation, just remember this. It's simply artificial, it's simply much smarter than any human. In practical terms, what it would mean is that if it is much smarter than us, it will certainly can outsmart us in controlling it. And that is a big problem that I will try to tackle today. Ray Kurzweil said that it will be available by 2029, 2035 perhaps. The poll carried out in March 23, people were talking about having it within a decade, so around 2023. But Jeffrey Hinton, the father of generative AI, who left Google this April, said, when asked when we will have artificial general intelligence, he said 5 to 20 years. And then after a certain hesitation, he said, it could be any time. Now you can interpret as you want. So Demis Hassabis, another grandee of artificial intelligence, chairman of the DeepMind, he said it could be just a few years ago, maybe within a decade away. So again, without being very precise, he indicates that it may be by 2030. But perhaps the most ominous event that indicates that it may really be around the corner is that I call it panic meeting between President Biden and our Prime Minister Sunak early June, which its main product is a conference that is to be set up in London in this autumn about setting up a new AI controlling agency, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. I know that people will think, if this is such a dangerous existential threat for humans, why don't we stop it? Well, we can't do it anymore. But what we can do, we can try to control its goals and behavior. So that's what I'll put forward to you over the rest of the presentation. You probably have heard that there are a number of existential risks, and climate change is probably one of the best known. But climate change is perhaps, in literal sense, that it will eliminate all humans, that may be even 200 years away, if nothing is done. But AGI may be very, very quickly our existential threat, but more importantly, it will determine, like none other existential threat, our future. That means whether we will evolve or we become an extinct species. Imagine then that since we have opened the Pandora's box and we are developing AI, that we are trying to climb a mountain. Like this great photos of people climbing Mount Everest. This is not a joke, this is reality. So, like climbing a mountain, we have three options. When we see that it's so difficult to do it, we say, all right, I pass on, I won't climb. Unfortunately, we even don't have that option. It's too late to switch it off. So, it is unlikely that if we just continue climbing or developing and we do nothing, that AGI will leave us alone. But let's assume that we've done something. So this is the second scenario. And we climbed the mountain, we climbed the Everest, but we are not prepared properly. What may happen then? We may fall. That is, we will fail. Humans may quite likely perish by, say, 2100. So the end of this century, as such people like Martin Rees, former astronomer royal, or the late Professor Stephen Hawking were suggesting, and many other people. So this is not a joke. And finally, and this is what is most encouraging, politicians are considering it seriously, that it can indeed be an existential threat. So this is option 2. We don't want that. We want option 3, that we climb prepared. So we'll control AGI and evolving with it into a new species. In this way, we'll succeed and we'll prevail. And that's the link to the title of my book. So in summary, if you want to evolve with AGI, we must keep it under control for as long as possible, because we need more and more time to teach it our values and preferences, so it is constrained in its goals, so it doesn't do us any harm. It doesn't think about the goals that goes against our intentions. But for that, we need more time. But the problem is that we cannot wait till AGI arrives, because when AGI arrives, since it's going to be smarter than us, that will be too late. We have to have that control before it arrives. And that is the problem. So when people think, well, we have 20, 50 years, or maybe even 10 years ago, forget it. We may have just 3 years, a few years ago. So the conclusion is that humans either evolve, prevail, or perish, fail. But to do that, we have to make what I call a civilizational shift to the world of transhumans coexisting with superintelligence. And I mentioned transhumans for the first time, and we'll hear more of this, and the role that the transhumans, in my view, can play in saving us. Now, in the book, I give a kind of metaphoric 10 commandments of how to carry out such a civilization shift. Don't worry, I won't go through that list. Instead, I'll cover what's in the list in a different way, which is probably more interesting. In my view, if we want to move from the current civilization, and this is what the name of the game is, to a new civilization, so we have to make a civilization shift, it has to be recognized that we shouldn't be just talking about AI regulation, but primarily, because that's where the danger is, AI development control. Since this is such a difficult subject, no wonder that is not on the agenda of the media. It comes to be very plainly understood, the concept of AI regulation and AI development, when we realize that AI is a tool, yes, and as a tool, like, for instance, robots, humanoids, and so on, it must be regulated, like pharmaceuticals are regulated, because it can do some harm to us. It can control us, block the entry to certain premises, or make some surveillance and infringement of our privacy which we don't like. And that's rightly why governments want to regulate it and started to regulate it. The governments can regulate AI because the changes in the use of AI as a tool are relatively slow. They are faster and faster, but relatively slow. So even the sluggish government processes may cope with that kind of development. But AI is also a software-driven intelligence. So in that sense, it will be our competitor. And as such, we have to look at it that it must be controlled, because when its intelligence surpasses ours, its goals and behavior should be aligned with our preferences so that it doesn't do us any harm. The only way that that can happen is not that government get involved in it, because the pace of change in self-learning AI is so fast that we may be talking about hours, where the new facilities and new capabilities of AI will be self-developed. And therefore, the only way that we can control AI effectively is by the AI sector itself. That means by the AI developers. So since AI regulation is relatively simple, I will focus on just AI development control. So now the key question is, how can we control AGI effectively? Not just to control it, it has to be effective. That means that humans will be able to control its goals, its intentions, and its general behavior. ChatGPT was released on 30th November last year. Within a few months, we had around 40 of ChatGPT-like imposters. Now we may have close to 100. Not only that, there are at least 2 of them, like Claude, that are 10 to 20 times more capable than the original ChatGPT, and they were not developed by OpenAI. So the same would happen with AGI. If the first company develops AGI and gives access to it's an open source, so others can also look into it. Within months, you will have tens or even hundreds of AGIs. How on earth are you going to control it? There's no way. It's so obvious, but so rarely are we talking about it. So my first, if you like, commandment is to develop just one global program, like the Manhattan Project. And that program will have hundreds, if not thousands, of projects, such as quantum computing, neuromorphic devices, AI mind, metaverse, and so on. But to develop that program, you also need one company, global company, I call it GAICOM, Global AI Company, and it should be created not exactly the same way, but it should function similar to CERN, which is an institute of high-speed physics, particle physics, near on the border of Switzerland, France, and Italy. So I'll give you an example. We have Google browser and we have Microsoft Bing. And the proper way to go forward, which may for some people be absolutely unthinkable, is to merge those 2 browsers into one global browser. There is no competition, no real competition than in the browsers, but the browsers are part of the Superintelligence program. It's a joint venture company where where Google and Microsoft would have their own shares, although the shares will be traded in order to focus on the main task of that GAICOM company. And obviously, other companies may chop off part of their companies and, like, for instance, developing, like NVIDIA developing processors, that unit might be part of the GAICOM joint venture company. The 4th element would be for the AI sector to manage itself and to manage, if you like, the interaction between various components of that huge superintelligence program. And I suggest that it should be created similarly to AI, to W3C Internet Consortium. Internet infrastructure is controlled by a non-political, independent organization which has functioned absolutely beautifully over the last 30 years. And why I propose that we create something similar to control GAICOM, the AI company, and through it, the whole development program. Finally, we need one more element. We need a supervision. It's unthinkable that an independent company, independent organization like GAICA would just do everything what it wants on our behalf. It has to be supervised. And probably that's the agency that Mr. Sunak and Mr. Biden had in mind, talking about setting up such an agency, perhaps in London. So that agency, which I call Global AI Governance Agency, GAIGA, should be set up in a similar way to International Atomic Energy Authority, which is based in Vienna, and which currently has so much to say in Zaporizhia in Ukraine on that nuclear power station. So how we would create GAIGA, that Global AI Governance Agency? We've heard a lot about G7 group, but this is a group that operates behind the scenes, so to speak. But believe it or not, I became convinced that in view of the situation changing so fast, that this is one of my hope that great things can happen fast. And one example of that is that G7 managed to create within just 1 year global partnership on AI, GPI, which is based in Paris and it's managed by OECD. So I suggest that G7 creates or initiate the creation of Global AI Governance Agency, GAIGA. Perhaps this is the agency that the President Biden and Prime Minister Sunak are talking about. So that would be that agency in my view. But I may have different views. Don't take it for granted. But I hope, I sincerely hope that somehow the United Nations manages to squeeze in and play a certain role in creation of such an organization. Remember that it is to be done in the autumn. It's a holiday period. How on earth the UN Assembly could send delegates and so on within such a short time? Perhaps it will, because that's how it should be. And finally, if it is not created in the autumn or even next year, then we may have by then a de facto world government. I'll be talking about that in a minute to show you whether this is at all possible to create in a short time. So this is GAIGA, the supremo of controlling artificial intelligence, and will be supervising that consortium, the AI consortium, the Global AI Control Agency that I was talking about. And that agency, in turn, if it has any urgent requests, for instance, regarding global legislation, that will be the chain of command that it will use. There is also that the Global Partnership on AI that I mentioned, that is already functioning in Paris. I renamed it GAIRA, Global AI Regulation Authority. And because of its extended, in the book I write about its extended tasks. And that should be also supervised by GAIGA. And any legislation or any other requests that require global intervention will be going through GIGA. And obviously the two agencies can cooperate and interact with themselves. Now, can we create a de facto world government, perhaps initiated by G7 within a few years' time? I know that many people may think it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't at all. I am really hopeful that it will happen. And here's how it can happen. First of all, we have to forget that the world government will include all members of the United Nations. It won't. If it includes half of the members, that will be a great success. I think even that won't happen. So my scenario is that G7 would initiate the process. It may not even be called world government. It's enough that it plays the role of the world government. So G7, members of G7, members of the European political community. Anybody has heard about that? Obviously, this is a new entity which had its second session in Moldova, the beginning of July, and it includes 48 countries, including Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Ukraine, and Turkey, and so on. Israel is not in there yet. We will have the presidency of the European political community beginning next year for 6 months. So this is our big chance to essentially propose something like that the members of European political community, which includes all the members of the European Union, by the way, members of NATO or OECD, altogether roughly 60, 80 countries, democratic countries, would create a de facto world government. And that is my scenario. If anybody says that it's too quick and it's impossible, then I remind you that NATO was created within a year when we were in 1949, when we were actually facing the Soviet inspired Third World War. So if the world is in real danger, and seems to be, that's what may happen. We may have a de facto world government within a year or two. Is everything clear what I am saying? Can you hear me properly?
Hearing you loud and clear, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Another few slides. I'll be done within 10 minutes. So, if we have a de facto world government, then we have to look how we can actually soften the transition to what I call a transhuman world. Because expect in the next few years, the whole decade, the decade of really excessive turbulence. Think about the technological unemployment. In Britain, for instance, the negative equity created by high interest rates, which will happen within a year on a big scale, and the global migration. How are we going to maintain order in it? We have to soften that process. And one way to soften that process is to distribute wealth across the globe more evenly, more justly. At the moment, imagine that 8 billionaires have so much wealth as 50% of the countries at the bottom of the league table. 50%, around 90 countries, right? That's the wealth of 8 billionaires. This is just unbelievable. But that's what the world we live in. So it has to, if we have a de facto world government, that's what we need to do. And that will lead to creation of a global welfare state. First of all, the Global Wealth Redistribution Fund. If we consider, for instance, I write specifically in the book that we are being taxed 3% annually, not just 0.7, but 3% annually to that global welfare distribution fund, it will be a bargain, because we will do immediately with the issues of migration. We do a lot about making better wealth redistribution, even in the developed countries, because that will gradually lead to the creation of global welfare state. Don't forget that if we do not blow ourselves up and we have control over AI, that AI will soon be doubling the current GDP rate, and some people say even trebling. So there will be a lot of goods, money that can be distributed apart from distributing the wealth that has already been created. So we have to be really optimistic. It is possible to have a fantastic future for humanity, but we have to survive this decade, and that's the major challenge. So to do that properly, I suggested 3 years ago in my book, Democracy for a Human Federation, that we should apply all controls for AI simultaneously, creating a maturing AI maturing framework. And the first element in it is the agreed universal values of humanity that would be embedded within the artificial intelligence, a political subject, very difficult. The second one is that we can't talk about controlling AI if it is embedded like in a cage in a computer. It wouldn't work. It has to be operating in normal environment, at care homes, at schools, at factories, so that it recognizes what it means to be human, what are our values, what the decisions we make based on those values. So it's a learning process. So we should nurture it as a child, at the code and factory and so on. But we have a problem. If we only stick to that, we may fail. Why? Because imagine that AI will develop its cognitive abilities almost exponentially, whereas human controlling it, well, their cognition abilities actually will be stored. We don't develop it that fast. So if AGI emerges, and by definition it is smarter than human, it of course will outsmart us and get out of control much earlier. And the only thing to overcome that, as I see it, is to apply transhuman governors skills and the wireless connection to what I call a master plate, where the transhuman governors will be controlling AI's main goals and behaviors by their thought alone. So now I'll show you what that, in this 2-minute slide, what that journey would involve, how we can cross the species boundary, being humans, transhumans, and posthumans. Probably most of you have heard about the brain-computer interface, like I had said here. We know ourselves, we are human. They're humans, but do you know that we are actually composed of 2 parts? We have a body which is permanently bonded to the brain. We think about the whole lot as one unit, but in fact, the brain is connected to the body by millions and billions of axons that go from neurons in the brain down to every part of the body. So there are wires going there. Now imagine that we put a BCI device over our head. What happens? We become a transhuman. We can, right now, transmit wirelessly some of our thoughts, memories, and decisions. You may be surprised, some of you at least, at whether this is possible. Now look at this lady. This happened in January this year, courtesy of Stanford University. They developed a method for that lady, but other people are already using it, that she can read and she can type in quotes by thought over 60 words per minute on a computer. She can do emails, she can do banking operations and so on, all by thought. And this is happening in 2023. If you now take into account that this is changing exponentially, what kind of capabilities, wireless capabilities, we will have in the next 2-3 years? And that's why I think that at some stage, decades away, we may be able to port bit by bit over the years all of our thoughts and decisions onto a digital chip. So we'll have a digital copy of our mind. Now, people may ask, so what? How can I love another person if I'm on a chip? Well, when you love another person, what happens in your brain, that there are waves of electromagnetic waves going one by one and creating emotions, and you get certain thrill, right? So this is all electromagnetic process. There won't be any difference if you have an avatar made of metal and human-like skin and plastic or whatever, that will be wirelessly controlled by that chip. That means you, and this is your body. As I mentioned, you can hear this is part of the human body. This is the equivalent of the body. That body would also have some cognitive functions that it can function properly. But in essence, there wouldn't be any difference between what you feel today as a human and what you feel as when you are a post-human. Now, I think it may be a shock for some, so I just move quickly to the next one so that you forget about that. Yes, but if we have that kind of capabilities, that transhuman governors, at least partially, can port their mind to an external digital device, that's how I suggest they may control superintelligence from inside, from within. So imagine that carefully selected, say, initially perhaps 100 or maybe 200 of transhumans, the top AI developers, first of all, are selected and connected in a wireless network. But they are also connected to the master plate. The master plate is like a BIOS in a computer system. This is a basic input-output system. Any computer, any mobile phone has this as the starting point. When you press the button, that's what happens. So that master plate will be like a BIOS system. And that will be under the control of the transhuman governors. And they'll be voting on certain actions, important actions that this master plate of superintelligence or AGI may be allowed to do. For instance, they want to upload a new version of software. So they will be voting on it. And they collect the votes and say, okay, 12 are for and 8 are against, so the decision is passed. And if you imagine that they progressively, the transhuman cognition will, the interface will be level, most of the times level with the speed, the pace of superintelligence improvement. That's when the transhumans, that's why the transhumans can follow the superintelligence, and it will be much more difficult to for the superintelligence to outsmart transhumans. That's the whole point. And that's why humans cannot do that. Now, this is the last slide. I skipped a lot. There are at least 100 slides in this presentation, but this is my last slide. And I just want to put forward a vision of what the world after 2030 may look like when we have a transhuman world government. Now, how it can happen? You remember that GAICA, the consortium, the AI Development Consortium, Global AI Control Agency, it will set up and facilitate the selection process for transhuman governors or transhumans. The criteria might be provided by the de facto world government. Criteria are very important indeed. But the de facto world government would also select by all the governments of the de facto, all these countries of the world government, their own candidates for transhuman governors. So since some candidates would not pass, they will have to propose more than they would be actually selected. But I hope that also the United Nations may still do its bit and still exist and still be somehow functioning, and through the United Nations, even from the countries that are not part of de facto world government, those representatives or those candidates will be there and will be reviewed by the Independent Selection Committee. Since at that time, we already have an existing transhuman governors board, including those who control superintelligence or the AGI, they will have to go through the reselection process, because the purpose now is not only to control the artificial intelligence, but to control or govern the world. Why, you may ask, suddenly transhumans have to govern the world? If we logically expand what I was just saying, that the transhumans will have imaginably greater cognition capabilities than any human, they will be more intelligent, perhaps 100, 1,000 times than any human on the planet. Why shouldn't they help us govern the planet? Why do we need politicians? I mean, this is a hard question, I know that, but we have to. You are talking about a new civilization when the old rules have to go in order to survive. And therefore, these guys, transhuman governors, will have a new role, apart from controlling superintelligence, to become members of the transhumans world government. And we may be talking about tens of thousands of those transhumans for various countries. The numbers doesn't matter because they will be partially digital. So their thinking process and coordination will be much faster than we can imagine. So when we have the transhuman world government, the selected new transhuman government will join it. And at that point, the de facto world government will pass control to the transhuman world government, which will be coexisting with the maturing superintelligence controlling it wirelessly. And believe it or not, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. Now we go to the question and answer session. Who wants to be first?
I can offer a few remarks if you wish, Tony.
Yes.
This is a huge topic, and you are to be truly congratulated on the scale and scope to which you have considered. So I want to support you in that straight off. You also emphasizing the urgency in this, that this potentially could overtake other existential risks. There are other important existential risks, such as climate change and so forth. This could overtake them. So I agree with you on the urgency. It's unclear how quickly superintelligence might arise, but indeed, I think it's plausible. We might have it a lot sooner than people expect, and 2030 is not out of the question. Therefore, it's clearly an important topic, and it's one that we need to get more people thinking about. And it's a topic with no easy answers. Any packed ideological worldviews will almost certainly shatter when people truly appreciate the scale of the issues there. So I'm with you all that way, although I diverge from some of your solutions or some of your diagnoses. I'm with you in saying there's more that the G7 can and should be doing. It is perhaps the best global body in the world if it truly insists on conformance to various democratic principles in the countries involved. So I see, like you, a role for an expanded G7. And I even agree with you on the importance of figuring out at least some definition of the universal values of humanity, that something that everybody can agree with. And it won't be a long statement, it won't be many points to it, but there are some things we probably all should be able to agree with. And that's the starting point for figuring out how we want AI to move forwards. And that may sound like an impossible project, but we did have the project in the late 1940s to work out the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Much earlier in history, there was the American, Constitutional Convention, when they worked out a very simple statement of the truths that are meant to be self-evident. So I think all of that, I agree with you. Then when it comes to some of your more detailed proposals, I think you've a lot more to establish that your answers are correct. Let me try something ambitious now. There's this new feature in Zoom, isn't there, where you can take a screenshot and bump it into chat. So let me do that.
Yeah.
This is the response to, here we go. Has that worked? You probably can't see this, but if you
I can see it, yes.
if you expand on
Can
that,
you can you see it?
Yeah.
it's the answers in my survey so far to the question, do you think it's credible? Is it desirable? There should be a single centralized development of AI. And although there are many questions in my survey, and most of them have a diversity of answers, most people are all over the place. Some people thinking one thing, some people thinking another. This is one question in which there's been the most common view, which is that it's a bad idea to try and centralize all of this development. It's not going to happen. It's politically impossible. It's bad from an engineering point of view. You can see there, somebody said, no, I don't think this is the most single dangerous idea of all. It's a pipe dream. And so if this is truly the way forwards, we're going to have to build a stronger argument for it. AI, no, I think your 10 commandments are also asking too much. When I see the list, I think, my goodness, who's going to agree to all of this? Can't we try and work out a more minimal solution which will be more effective? Now, maybe it is true we need a very complicated system such as you're proposing, but I haven't seen that argument yet. So that, I think, needs a bit more work. And final point, a bit more specific, your idea that we could be able to control these superintelligences via something like this I'm wearing now, but maybe more advanced, a brain-computer interface that would limit what these very powerful superintelligences would do. Well, I think the humans would just be overwhelmed in such